Hi, I'm Cory Driver, and this is Moving Forward. So this week is Christ the King Sunday. We are in John 18, and we're talking about kings and release. Friends, settle in. It is time for Grandpa Driver's story time. So I have never been properly arrested. I have been detained a couple times. The first time happened when I was 21. I was studying abroad in Israel at Hebrew University. It was the tail end of the Second Intifada. The West Bank separation wall was being constructed. Israel was beginning to tear down settlements in Gaza and forcibly evict Israelis living there. And tensions were high, to say the least. And I was an idiot, just walking around taking pictures of flowers and graffiti, knowing that human suffering was all around, but not really integrating that. And the flowers I was taking pictures of were in front of the prime minister's residence at the time. And the graffiti I was taking pictures of was on the construction of the separation wall that still cuts off so many Palestinians from their lands and jobs. And so Israeli police, who I guess had been following me for a while, finally detained me. I was surrounded by 4 officers. At least one had a gun trained on me, and they took my camera. Back when we had cameras, right, that were not parts of our phone. They took my camera and started flipping through the photos. And they flipped through the photos, including the spring fling that I had just been in. And as I recall, I had been named King of Spring in the dance. That's an important detail. Now, I was super nervous. This was my first time living overseas. My Hebrew wasn't great. My Arabic was better, but also not great, but also probably wouldn't have helped a ton in that situation. Was I going to be arrested? Was I going to have to try to call my folks from several thousand miles away? Was I going to miss class? What was going to happen? And all at once, the police officers who were flipping through my photos, they started laughing. They started laughing hilariously. They had found a picture of me in a pink shirt with a little makeshift crown on my head, and they were cutting up. One officer derisively said, "You look super cool," and tossed my camera back to me. They told me to quit taking pictures and that I was free to go. I was released. I was so scared, repeatedly insisting that I hadn't done anything wrong, that I was just taking pictures of flowers. Didn't really matter. It was only my kingship of a silly college get together that had won my release. The gospel, this Christ the King Sunday, is all about kingship and release. The gospel, according to John, presents an interesting dialogue between Jesus and Pilate. Pilate asked Jesus if he was a king. Jesus' response is a little bit oblique, and he talks about his kingdom instead of his kingship. Jesus said his kingdom is not of this world, because if it was, his followers would have fought to prevent him being handed over to the Jews. John 18:36. What? What's going on here? Jesus had already been handed over to the Jews by Judas and those with him that came to Jesus as he was praying. And some of his disciples had fought, at least a little. Peter cut off some guy's ear. Gross. But it wasn't much of a revolt, and Jesus was taken. Aside from some insults and one slap, the Jews were not much of a danger to Jesus anymore. Pilate certainly isn't Jewish. The people who are going to torture Jesus to death, also not Jews, but Romans. We understand the thing that Jesus's real followers in his real kingdom are trying to prevent in just a couple verses later. The opportunity for freedom, for release, is presented as Pilate offering to let one of the condemned criminals go to the Jews. Jesus is ultimately going to say that Pilate would have no power over him had it not been given to Pilate from above. Jesus has all the power, he says, as the one who sits rightfully on David's throne. And yet, release, being given freedom, is the most dangerous thing for Jesus's kingdom. Listen, at any moment in the humiliation, torture, and murder inflicted on Jesus by the Romans, Jesus could have called out for myriads of angels to come and save him and presumably to smite the Romans who were doing this to him. And maybe, yeah, get the few Sadducees that were in on it, maybe the high priest's family, but there's not so many there. But on this Christ the King Sunday, pay attention to what kind of king Jesus is. He refused release. Those who were really with him, and here I'm thinking about the angels, are preventing him being handed over to freedom. Think about what kind of danger it would be to humans if Jesus enforced his request that he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, that the cup be taken from him. Freedom is the dangerous thing. Jesus has to go through torture at the hands of the Romans in order to secure his real victory for his real kingdom that is not of this world, to secure his real victory over sin and death. On Christ the King Sunday, our King suffers for us. He refuses release and thereby wins our release from sin and death. This King of Spring in my Sealy pink shirt in the photos would have done anything to get release when I was just detained, had I had any kind of power at all. King Jesus, on the other hand, does everything to avoid release and avoid freedom, even if his human disciples and followers wished it. His refusal to be released means release for all of us. For this, we say, Hail, King Jesus. Thanks be to God. Amen.